In 2021, the United States child support system collected $20.2 billion. That is more money than the entire GDP of Iceland. The system tracked down parents across state lines, garnished wages, suspended licenses, and sent people to jail, all in the name of children. Yet, the child poverty rate in single-parent homes stayed above 40%. It barely moved. So where did $20 billion go? That gap between the money that moved and the children who stayed poor is the entire story of this film. Most people carry a simple mental model of child support. A couple splits up. One parent, usually the father, is ordered to pay a monthly amount. The money goes to the children. If he refuses, the state steps in and makes him pay. The moral logic seems airtight. Parents are responsible for their kids, full stop. Or that framing has dominated American politics for decades. Ronald Reagan hammered it. Bill Clinton formalized it. By 1998, Congress had passed the Deadbeat Parents Punishment Act, making it a federal felony to cross state lines to avoid child support. By then, the word deadbeat had already done enormous cultural work. It conjured a man who abandoned his family, refused his obligations, and forced taxpayers to pick up the tab. Real non-payment existed, but the image was also useful because as long as the problem looked like a moral failure of individual men, nobody had to ask whether the system itself was broken. It was broken. Not in the way most people imagined, but in a deeper and more structural way that was visible if you knew where to look. Before we get deep into the weeds, I want to take a short pause for the sponsor that makes this video possible, topictovideo.com. Have you ever thought about making money on YouTube but didn't want to show your face? Good news, you're already watching proof it works. This video right now is faceless, no camera, no on-screen host, just a topic, a voice, a main character that represents me, and visuals that keep you watching. And here's the wild part. You don't need a studio. You don't need editing skills. You don't need to write scripts. You don't need animation skills, voice acting talent, expensive software, or a single piece of equipment. You don't even need a microphone. Topictovideo.com does all of it for you. Type your topic, get a finished video ready to upload straight to your channel. Voiceover, visuals, captions, thumbnail, and shorts. Your first video is free at topictovideo.com. No credit card needed to start. Create the channel you've been putting off with topictovideo.com today. To understand how child support became what it is today, you have to go back to 1975. Before that year, child support was primarily a state and local matter, informal, inconsistently enforced, and largely disconnected from federal policy. Then Congress passed an amendment to the Social Security Act known as Title 4D, and everything changed. The immediate context was welfare spending. Single-parent households were growing. Federal AFDC payments, aid to families with dependent children, were rising. Congress wanted to recover some of that money from the fathers who, in their view, had caused the problem. Title 4D created a new federal state partnership. States would set up child support enforcement offices, and the federal government would reimburse them based on dollars collected. That funding formula was the key decision. It embedded a specific incentive directly into federal law, and that incentive has governed everything that followed. A state child support office that collected more money received more federal funding. A state office that chose instead to help low-income fathers get jobs, set realistic orders, or forgive arrears that would never be paid got less. The incentive was not ambiguous. It pointed in one direction: collect. The system was not designed to help children. It was designed to recover state welfare costs. The funding incentive was only the foundation. To understand the full machinery, you need to understand how child support orders get set and what happens when someone cannot pay. When a court sets a child support order, it does not always look at what the parent is actually earning. In a large share of low-income cases, courts use income imputation. They assume the parent could be earning a certain amount, often based on minimum wage or prior earnings, and set the order against that assumed income, no matter whether the person is employed. The idea is to prevent parents from voluntarily reducing their income to reduce their obligation. In theory, it makes sense. In practice, it means that an unemployed father starts accumulating debt from the first month of job loss, even if he has no income at all. Those unpaid amounts are called arrears, the technical term for child support debt. And arrears do not simply sit idle. In many states, they compound at interest rates of 6 to 10% annually. They cannot be discharged in bankruptcy. Under federal law passed in 1998, they do not go away even if the parent dies. They attach to the estate. Once arrears cross certain thresholds, enforcement kicks in automatically. Wages are garnished at up to 65%. Tax refunds are intercepted, driver's licenses are suspended, professional licenses are revoked, and passports are denied. Every one of these penalties makes it harder to earn income. A suspended driver's license in a rural state is not an inconvenience. It is the end of the ability to commute to work. A garnished paycheck at 65% can leave a person with less than what they need to cover rent and food, pushing them toward the informal economy and further out of the system's reach. And if the arrears continue to grow, which they will because the income was never there, the next step is incarceration. Approximately 300,000 people are jailed every year in the United States for child support contempt. The formal charge is not debt. It is disobedience of a court order. But the underlying reality is imprisonment for inability to pay. 95% of these individuals have incomes below the poverty line. The state spends thousands of dollars to incarcerate them. The children receive nothing. Tasha Moore was a mother of 2 in Baltimore. In 2005, she fled an abusive relationship with $180 and no plan. She did everything the system told her to do. She filed for child support. She attended every hearing. She navigated the paperwork and the attorneys and the delays. The court ordered her ex to pay $400 a month. He paid for 3 months, then disappeared. Over the next 12 years, Moore worked 2 jobs, raised her children largely alone, and pursued the support order through the courts whenever she could. By the time her daughter turned 18, Moore had received just over $1,200 in total child support across 12 years. She had also spent more than $8,000 in court costs, attorney fees, and collection-related expenses. The system had cost her more than it had given her. This is not an unusual outcome. It is the predictable result of a system that tries to extract money from people who do not have it. The machinery was loud. The enforcement was real. The child still grew up in poverty. The system did not fail to try. It failed because the fundamental premise was wrong. You cannot collect your way out of poverty. If the non-custodial parent does not have the money, no amount of legal machinery will produce it. James Scullion was a carpenter in Virginia. In the late 1980s, a court ordered him to pay $650 a month for his 3 children, a sum that represented more than half his annual take-home income. For years, he paid what he could. During periods of steady work, he was close to current. During periods of unemployment, arrears accumulated. By the late 1990s, he had paid a total of more than $58,000 into the system. His 3 children, meanwhile, were living with their mother and her second husband, who earned over $120,000 a year but had no legal obligation to contribute to the children's expenses. Scullion's own children from a second marriage lived in poverty because he had nothing left. In 1997, Scullion was jailed for $8,000 in arrears accumulated during an extended period of unemployment. He served his time. Upon release, his criminal record made it nearly impossible to secure stable employment. Arrears kept accruing. He died in 2002 at the age of 51. His estate carried $127,000 in child support debt, a number that had grown entirely during years when he had no meaningful ability to pay it. His story is used in law school seminars on the economics of child support. It is almost invisible outside that context. It illustrates the internal logic of a system that cannot distinguish between someone who refuses to pay and someone who is mathematically incapable of paying. The enforcement machinery treats both identically. The outcome in both cases is that the children receive nothing, but one of those paths spent enormous state resources producing that outcome. Both of these stories end in the same place. The children lose. Not because their parents stopped caring, but because the system surrounding them was engineered to move money and engineered badly. By now, you may be asking the same question that keeps appearing in every reform conversation about this system. If the children are not receiving the benefit, who is? The answer requires understanding one specific mechanism that most people have never heard of: the welfare offset. When a custodial parent receives welfare benefits, specifically TANF, temporary assistance for needy families, any child support collected on her behalf does not automatically flow to her. Instead, the state is permitted to keep a portion of that collection as reimbursement for the welfare it has already paid out. The exact rules vary by state and have changed over time. But in many cases, under the rules established by the 1996 welfare reform law, the state kept the majority of what was collected, and the family saw little or none of it. A mother receiving $150 a month in TANF and $200 in child support might walk away with $240 total, less than the combined amount, and significantly less than if the father had simply given her the cash directly outside the system. The non-custodial parent paid, the state collected, the child received a fraction. This is not a malfunction, it is the architecture. Federal Title 4D created roughly $850 million in annual subsidies to state enforcement programs. States compete for that money by demonstrating collection volume. The incentive to collect is embedded in the statute, and it has been there since 1975. Then there are the foster care cost recovery orders, and this is where the story gets genuinely stark. When a child is placed in foster care, some states bill the non-custodial parent for the cost of that placement, which can run $1,200 to $2,500 a month. These billing orders are layered on top of existing child support obligations. Research from the Institute for Research on Poverty found that parents facing these combined orders were significantly more likely to have their parental rights terminated. In some analyses, the odds were roughly triple what they would have been without the financial pressure. They were also more likely to see foster placements extend for longer. The state's financial interest in recovering foster care costs was producing measurably worse outcomes for children in state care. The system, at its absolute worst, profits most when families are most broken. And the coalition that resists changing this is not difficult to identify. State attorneys general whose budgets depend on IVD revenue. Child support enforcement bureaucracies whose federal funding is tied to collection volume. Private collection contractors who are paid per dollar recovered. Family law attorneys who bill by the hour on modification and enforcement cases. None of these groups are motivated by malice. They are responding rationally to the incentives they face, and those incentives all point away from reform. The design flaws that were visible in ordinary times became catastrophic in 2020. When the pandemic shutdowns arrived in March of that year, millions of people lost employment almost overnight. Among them were hundreds of thousands of non-custodial parents who had been meeting their child support obligations, people who were, by the system's own definition, compliant. Most states did not suspend interest on arrears during the pandemic. Most states did not automatically modify orders downward when employment collapsed. A father earning $35,000 a year with a $600 monthly order who lost work in March 2020 found himself accumulating $600 in debt every month, plus interest despite having no income. Requesting a modification required filing a formal court petition, hiring an attorney if possible, and waiting sometimes 6 months, sometimes longer for a hearing. The wealthy could navigate that. The poor could not. By June 2021, a parent who had lost work at the start of the pandemic and received no modification could easily carry more than $9,000 in new arrears, entirely unrelated to any unwillingness to pay. That cohort, compliant parents who became debtors through no fault of their own, is now in 2025 and 2026 beginning to face the criminal justice consequences of arrears that grew during a public health emergency. The enforcement machinery does not ask how the debt was created. It only asks whether it exists. None of this is inevitable. The outcomes we are describing are not the result of some fixed law of human nature or family economics. They are the result of design choices. And the clearest proof of that is Sweden. Sweden has a child support system too. Parents who separate are expected to contribute to their children's financial needs. Non-payment is taken seriously, but the structural logic is fundamentally different. In Sweden, the government advances the payment to the custodial parent first. If the non-custodial parent pays, the government is reimbursed. If the non-custodial parent cannot pay, the government absorbs the shortfall temporarily. The child never waits. The custodial parent never depends on the enforcement machinery to put food on the table this month. The risk of non-payment is transferred from the child to the state, which is infinitely better positioned to absorb it. The result is an 80% compliance rate compared to roughly 65% in the United States. Child poverty in Swedish single-parent homes is a fraction of what it is here. The design difference is not cultural. Sweden did not achieve this because Swedish fathers are more virtuous. It achieved this because the system was built to serve children first and collect from non-custodial parents second. The United States system collects first and serves children second when it serves them at all. That ordering is a policy choice, not a natural law. And it is a choice that has been made and remade every time Congress has renewed Title 4D without changing the incentive structure that sits at its core. Return for a moment to the opening number, $20.2 billion. Now you know more precisely where it went. Some of it reached children. Some of it was absorbed by state welfare offsets. Some of it was consumed by the enforcement apparatus itself, the courts, the jails, the caseworkers, the contractors. Some of it generated arrears that will never be paid by people who are now too poor or too imprisoned or too unemployable to pay them. The $116 billion in cumulative unpaid child support that exists in this country is not primarily a record of moral failure. It is a record of orders that were mathematically unrealistic when they were written. They were set against incomes that were imputed rather than actual by a system that was rewarded for generating high numbers regardless of whether they were collectible. The children in these families are not poor because their parents did not love them. They are poor because the system that was supposed to help them was designed around a different goal entirely. State revenue recovery and the children's welfare was at best a secondary consideration. Every political conversation about deadbeat parents is a conversation about individual behavior inside a structurally broken incentive system. The people caught in that system are not primarily the problem. The architecture is, and architecture, unlike human nature, can actually be changed. the United States could decide tomorrow to advance payments to custodial families first and collect from non-custodial parents second. It could decide to set orders based on actual income rather than imputed income. It could decide that arrears accumulated during a public health emergency should not follow someone into a criminal courtroom 5 years later. It could decide that incarcerating 300,000 poor people every year at enormous public expense in exchange for zero child benefit is not a rational policy. Other countries made those decisions. The reason the United States has not is not that these ideas are impractical. It is that the people with the power to change the system are among the people who profit from leaving it exactly as it is. That is not a cynical observation. It is a structural one, and structural problems at least have structural solutions if enough people understand them well enough to demand them.